Okay, welcome to A Lit Passage, Conversations in Reading and Living. I'm excited to be joined by Adam Cushman, the author of Cut, a really interesting, transgressive, would you call it a suburban nightmare or a suburban paradise upended novel? One of the two.
It's certainly got elements of a nightmare,
Yeah.
but it's more of, like it's intended to be more of a parody
It's all,
than
yeah,
anything else.
exactly. Perry dice, I guess, because
Yeah,
they're certainly
I like
seeking a
that.
liberation. Yeah. And
Yeah.
Adam is also the author of Critically Acclaimed, which is, speaking of parody, a wonderful collection of uh, fake or could be movie reviews. I guess would you describe it that way?
That's a we could spend an hour on that. I mean,
Yes, you'll
it's
have to have you
I
back
I
just to
think
talk about that. That's a whole new genre.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think they're intended to be parody, but there is truth within it, which
Yes.
I think is true of satire in general. It can't be satirical unless there's
Yes.
real truth there.
And there's some really interesting illumination driven from an appreciative or an interpretive lens when they're writing about a movie with actors that weren't in it or changing the setting. It's really interesting. So
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to
that's
do.
critically acclaimed and a wonderful experiments in form too. They're all read differently, which is great. Adam also is the screenwriter and director of Restraint, which has I don't know. Your endings are always good, but this may be more fit. It may have been a little too prophetic in some ways about considering what's going on. And
Hmm.
also the director of Maestro, which is I think it's on Amazon Prime still, Adam. So that's great.
Yeah, free on Prime. Both of them are actually.
Oh, that's good. I really recommend Restraint as well, which was your first film, and I'm sure we'll talk about Maestro. I'd like to start off with that. Adam's also the co-host of Roll Call, which is a really interesting podcast talking about, it's for cinephiles, but talking about acting technique, acting tradition, Hollywood acting methods. So that's Roll Call podcast, and he's the owner and co-founder. You were a founder, and now you're the owner. So I guess you've always been both, yes? Of
Yes, exactly.
Film 14, which has passed recently a milestone, 500 book trailers. And I can remember, how long has it been? Because it wasn't too long that you were wondering how this would take off.
Yeah, it's been about 7 years.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that because there was a little controversy when you were starting about, was a book trailer too pure for the literary art? And
Oh, I think
I
that's
think
still a controversy.
yeah, but I think I think you've they may still hold that intellectual opinion, but it seems to be working for a lot of
Yes,
authors, and so
definitely.
that's something we can maybe talk about because it is an interesting discussion about uh, the controversy or also some of the benefits I think authors discover in, particularly thinking about how their work maybe they also maybe turn into a film. So they
Yeah,
almost kind of pre-advertise a treatment in a way, and in that sense, exercise a little more control over how it may be received if it's optioned for a screenplay, and that I think is a really interesting benefit.
thanks, man. Yeah, that's pretty much the idea behind it. Is to get scale
Yeah, yeah, and I
out of
think
the videos.
and I think that was an interesting innovation because it wasn't just how to sell this book, because people
Right.
don't read that much. It was more far, I guess, far-reaching in its implications of what the author can do when they're often at a loss when you move into that option land of film, as you know.
That's what it's supposed to be. I mean, it's still a battle in terms of like I do a lot of these for publishers. It's not a battle, but like doing a lot of the work for the big publishers, they tend to approach it just like a movie trailer, which is a single purpose, a very limited time frame
Hmm.
to use it within.
Yeah.
And I've always posited that you could get a lot more mileage out of the videos in general if you approach it like music videos approach videos, which is that it's not a direct ad. It's kind of an isolated work of art that
Yes.
in being what it is, uh, draws people into that band, to that song, to that album, and just makes them interested in learning more. But it also is a very satisfying, entertaining experience in and of itself.
And it's often the first. it's often a first reader, not the only reader, not the dominant reader, but it is an initial read of the book, not just an advertisement of what happened, a plot-based advertisement, but a play and interpretation that can open up the reading experience. And I think that was the controversy about you don't want to impinge on the reader's, I guess, innocence with images before they encounter the text. But
Yeah,
I think it adds to it. I think it adds
I do
to it.
too.
Yeah.
And I also think, in terms of the production aspect of a book trailer, it's up to the author or the publisher if they like, to speak to what you're talking about, if they want to show a face, for example, if they want to show a full face of a character,
Mm.
versus not doing that and just showing, a portion, or leaving, most of the features in the negative space. I think that's a choice. I think, like I said, larger publishers seem to want to do that, whereas authors who are producing the videos themselves, or are responsible for their own marketing largely, they're into it. They want to see the casting. They want to see
Yeah.
like you're saying, they want to see the potential movie, because it satisfies them, it satisfies their readers, but it also gives producers in LA, more of a sense of, this book, that, because they don't want to read. Actually, they don't want to read stuff. They want to be told what it is, and
Yeah.
make a decision based on that, which, I get. Um, but it also shows them that, the author or the publisher, whoever's producing it, understands their world a little bit.
Mm.
So it helps to break down that barrier.
Yeah.
It's not a guarantee of anything, but it's certainly a unique and novel way to pitch a story,
Yeah.
at least today.
Yeah, they want to be told and sold.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I think for the author, it's interesting because, I mean, from finishing your book that it's kind of left behind. But here's another way to continue the creative dialogue that started maybe from just an idea of a character, or just an image the author had, or a structure they had. But it continues the process outside the book when it's done in an interesting way. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I also want to talk about Maestro because I'm going to take a few minutes, but I went back to my days when I finished Maestro. I don't want to give away the ending, so I won't. But I was haunted by it in a good way,
Really?
and I was sent back to my days when I went back to school after, as you know, I lived in LA and was doing some playwriting and some acting and some screenwriting, and ended up going back to college at 30, and found myself in this crazy class. It was a year long. It was history and theory of the novel from the ancient Greeks all the way up to early 1900s, and we ended with Middlemarch, which is a huge book. It's like 780 pages. It's a work of genius, and I have the last line for you. Okay, the last line of Middlemarch. I had to look it up because I don't want to ruin the beautiful prose. So the Middlemarch ends with, that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have, is half owing to the number who faithfully lived a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. So I finished that book in this class, which was really hard for me because, I mean, I'd come back from 10 years out of school. Half the time I didn't know what people were talking about because of literary theory terms. And I walked out of the classroom and was really hit. My mom had passed when I was younger. And, George Eliot, she's talking about, women of all classes who were kept out of creative lives and kept out of opportunity, the unfinished tomb. And so the sentiment that you end with in Maestro, I think, in its focus on making small things with great love, I think is a really powerful, timeless message. And it's told throughout the film. But I also thought that, it calls you into existence as life being a creative act, in a relationship, in a moment. And even though it's timeless, I thought it's really timely for now, because things are so disconnected from what we were used to in, let's say, February, whether that's the
Right.
lockdown or the protests, the injustice. And so it's really it's this timeless message about the call to live not just the creative light of, let's say, an artist, but to live a life that we're given and make it and create with it, whether that's a relationship or a conversation, even a goal, what we do with a moment. But it's very timely now because it's true that right now the smallest things done with great love can really make a difference like maybe never before. A post can be read 10,000 kilometers away. I mean, I'm in Izmir, ancient Smyrna from the book of Revelations. We were in the Bible. You're in LA, Hollywood, Babylon. We're having a conversation. It may connect with somebody, someone making a sign, someone taking their first steps. Maybe they hadn't protested before, but now they are. So I really want to compliment you on fusing this timelessness that's really, I think, in this tradition that I talked about, that was shown about in George Eliot speaking of the people in unmarked tombs, or Virginia Woolf with To the Lighthouse, the painting that's never seen. And it's an interesting moment now where so many people are trying to engage in mass. How much can you mass? How much can you do? How much followers can you get? How much can you kind of be? And I really think that message is powerful. So I was wondering that, A, do you think about it like that? And B, how do you think about that message now when you, like the rest of us, have been forced inside? There's more uncertainty. You maybe don't have projects developing like you did before. So are you able to reconnect with your own? Hi, Sasha. She came in. Are you able to? Do you have to resurrect your own message because maybe you forgot about it when you finished the film? I'm kind
It's
of all over
interesting.
the place, but that's
Yeah.
it.
I have not thought about the message of that film as applied to now until you mentioned it, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting. I think there's a lot behind that, in terms, especially in terms of doing little things, because that's really all you can do.
Right.
But turning that into a very positive thing, which I hope that the character in the Maestro was able to do. I have to be fully honest, man. That line at the end of the movie that you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
like it was the last line we came up with. We came up with it in post. That wasn't in the script,
Wow.
and we just needed we needed something that kind of encapsulated all of it. The relationship between Mario and Jerry, Jerry's conflict, and the message we were sending to artists,
Mm-hmm.
to either established or aspiring or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And this line hit me, and I'm like, oh. And I said it to the producer who was in the booth, and he's like, oh my God. He's like, that's it.
Yeah.
And we put it in, and it was nagging me. Like, I was like, this is so familiar. And I Googled it. It's Mother Teresa came up with
Wow.
this.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, it's a Mother Teresa line, and
Incredible.
it's beautiful, beautiful,
Incredible.
not too beautiful for me to come up with. And then I told the producer, I'm like, full disclosure, dude, this is Mother Teresa's. He's like, I don't give a shit. Well, if they recognize that at the end of the movie, we'll congratulate them.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well,
okay,
now they will. Now they can go look at it and.
yeah, I know. I just outed
But I mean,
myself.
coming, it doesn't. I guess it doesn't surprise me coming from her because it is that. I mean, she embodies that timeless in the timely. That call to existence. That quote. It's really powerful. And I think
Yeah,
about. I think sometimes we suffer from saying, we can be creative when we're doing X, or if someone's in a certain field, they're creative and other people aren't. And of course, I understand all of the business behind it, but it's this notion of life as a creative act that really comes through in your film, and a lot of characters are hitting it different ways. I mean, the beginning is pretty brutal, with
dude.
with the guy being told, I think you should be an architect or whatever, and it could be, it was kind of the opposite of the ending, but it still hasn't exiled him from a creative life in this big sense, and I think
Right.
for me anyway, far away from a lot that I was used to. We're having to rethink about moments. And now, of course, with the economic situation and the social upheaval and the protests and the calls for justice, it's we're having to re-examine these moments that are coming to us. So I just thought it was really interesting for me personally, but it's a great it was a great capture for you
Thanks, man.
and a great message, and I think it's not easy and not often to bridge the timeless with the radically timely. So congratulations on that.
Thanks, man. And I think a lot of that comes from, not trying too hard to do that. Like, the thing with this film was that, it wasn't my script. I worked on it, as the director would. Um, Worked on it maybe a little more than usual. But part of the process of the Maestro was discovering what the story was.
Hmm.
Was discovering. Sorry, she just slammed the door in my ear.
That's okay.
Um, Discovering, like what a satisfying arc would be for this character, but being faithful to the true story of, what happened to this guy, because it's about a guy who didn't become, the teacher of John Williams and Andre Previn and Jerry
Yeah.
Goldsmith et al. But
And who knew Igor Stravinsky?
Yeah, he knew him. They hung out. He hung
Yeah.
out with Segovia. There's a
Wow.
whole Segovia section I wanted to do,
Wow.
because Segovia would send his students, his guitar students, to Mario just to get a tune-up.
Yeah.
That's what remember those two guitar players?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's what that was about.
Yeah.
Huge influence on the musical communities, not just in classical, but even in jazz, which he hated. He thought jazz was insolent and chaotic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even like the West Coast jazz musicians would come to Mario just for a tune-up and to check in with themselves. So he inadvertently became the father of West Coast jazz. That's what he's considered.
Amazing. And when you think about, sorry, just to throw in about film music, I mean, when you think about John Williams, how many? I mean, he's probably some of those bars from Star Wars or Jaws. He was Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have got to be some of the most recognized pieces of music, but not in a jingle way. I mean, you probably can play them anywhere, and they would know it's John Williams. And John Williams was the maestro's student.
Henry Mancini, you say that name, you think of certain pieces.
Mm-hmm.
I think that speaks a lot about today's film music, because, they're making more films than ever before. They're spending more than ever before. The blockbusters are, it's not my cup of tea, but they're making a shit ton of them. But I've seen most of them. I see what's out there, even if I don't care for it.
Mm-hmm.
In the last 15 years, if you were to ask me to just hum any of the music, any of the score from any of those movies, I wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't recognize it. I can't tell you what the music is in any Marvel movie. Whereas if I even go back to, the blockbuster films of our childhood,
Mm-hmm.
be it E.T., Superman, Indiana Jones,
Mm-hmm.
Any of them, Jaws, I know that music right off. And it has an emotional connection for me to the narrative and to the filmmaking. I think that's largely gone from cinema. I mean, the only movie that I can recall music from in recent memory is Moonlight.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, I think other than maybe some of the Danny Elfman's work would maybe be recognizable, but it's a different approach. I used to know. I knew this woman who was, unfortunately, she's passed, but she was a violinist for John Williams Orchestra, and her last performance was on I think it was Schindler's List, because I think that was a John Williams film, wasn't it? I think he scored that film.
I believe he did, yeah.
Yeah, and it was her last work. She was 30 years. She ended up going to the Soviet Union on tour in the 60s, and she once showed me her violin, and it wasn't a Stradivarius. It was another one that was rare, and she showed it to me, and I'm just holding this violin, and it was older than America.
Really?
Yeah, and she showed me the paperwork of where it had been for over 250 years. It spent 100 years in a shop in Paris. And she was the violinist, and she used to tell me about the scoring sessions with John Williams. And though blockbusters are getting more expensive, they're not spending it necessarily on those musicians in front of a live
No,
score with the score, and but it is a good homage. I mean, it's more than a good homage. It's an important homage to an incredible cultural influencer and master teacher who
yeah,
who nobody knows.
that's right.
And that's only one of the characters. Not even
Yeah,
talking about the character arc I was on. Yeah. And I wanted
yeah,
to talk to you as well because I know you're a student of the legendary acting teacher Jack Waltzer. Am I pronouncing it right?
that's right.
Yeah. Who's been doing it for what, 50 years or something like that?
Yeah,
He's been teaching
he's
actors.
94.
Yeah.
He's
And I know
94
you've
now.
been working with him, and some of the actors from the film, including the maestro, I believe, came from the studio that you're working with as an actor because you want to develop your own, probably help their directing and screenwriting skills, but also your understanding of the art of acting. And I think that's very unusual. Could you talk a little bit about how that may have affected the writing process or the filming process, or
Oh,
just
definitely,
you as a
definitely.
director having to go through these, brutal monologues or screen critique or, cold
Yeah.
readings?
Yeah, I mean, I started doing it about 5 years ago, and it was for the most part um, just to augment the directing, to augment my relationship with actors and be able to speak to them on their level and get them to trust me. I didn't, not that I had a problem with that before, but I figured, the more knowledge I had about what they do, the better.
Walk in their skin, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a largely intellectual approach,
Hmm.
what I just described. And I found that working with Jack, there's no bullshit. There's no room for bullshit. It's impossible to fake in his class. You either have it or you don't. But he teaches you how to have it. When I say it, I mean be able to get to real emotion,
Hmm.
whatever that is, using imaginary circumstances, using past traumas, using you know the moment, whatever works for you. He tends to merge Stella Adler, Strasberg, Meisner, Uta Hagen, Bobby Lewis, all those guys into his own technique. And what I found was that that what the great actors like Meryl Streep and Julianne Moore and Brando and De Niro do naturally can be taught as a technique to anybody who's very serious about it. And so I fell in love with it, man. I mean, I fell in love with the craft of it, the process of it, just getting in touch with myself and realizing, my own barriers that I'd created over the years,
Hmm.
and stripping those down. Um, and around the time I started, it was my second workshop with him. I was studying in Paris for 2 months. Was when the Maestro project kind of fell in my lap, and I started to see real strong parallels between what Mario was trying to do with his students and what Jack was trying to do with his acting students. And really, it was just a
Wow.
separation of mediums. I mean,
Yeah.
any art form you choose to explore, it comes from within. And if you're not really in touch with yourself, the art is gonna be reflected in that. And so I started to just use that. And when I did rewrites, um, little things that I saw Jack do, um, to help students get in touch. I tried to use that with his relationship with Jerry, but just as applied to music.
Hmm.
And then with the actors, there was a few. There was the actress who played Mrs. Stella in The
Hmm.
Maestro,
Hmm.
who runs the boarding house that all the artists live in.
Right.
Was an actress named Joelle Sichaud, who
Yeah.
is actually Jack's main assistant in the workshops and has been for 30 years.
Wow. Yeah. I I'm thinking about. I don't want to get off the topic necessarily of this connection because it's really interesting about being in the relationship with Jack as the teacher while you're writing about the teacher with the actor who's also in the relationship with the teacher, and
Mm-hmm.
then rewriting it, and probably even noticing stuff on set that you had never would never have thought about, maybe from your desk as the screenwriter.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest one being that, I mean, I could do this before, but I can do this now, like from 400 yards, is being able to see when an actor is not doing it.
Hmm.
If they're faking it, if they aren't in touch with where they need to be in the scene, with the character's point of view or whatever, I see it very, very readily now. And I see the actors who are in it. I was watching remember the actor's name. It was a Terrence Malick movie, one of the ones that he did for like no money that was all handheld. And it was Christian Bale and the kid from American Beauty, and they played brothers. And their father, played by Brian Dennehy, passes away. And you look at, like, they're both having an emotional scene. It's about their relationship. Bale is in it, man. Like, he is in it. The other actor, not so much. And it's something I might not have recognized that earlier. But the level of focus, the level of concentration that that guy has separates him from the masses. That's why he's great. That's why everyone wants to work with him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting to have that bringing the eye of the writer, but also the understanding the actor, but also the director, but beyond that, seeing a great teacher. One of the the greatest teachers I have had, they've been outside of standard academia, and that I think has got to help your working with situations on the set, I would imagine.
Oh, definitely. And also that, in this work, you're not really working toward any kind of validation. You're not working necessarily to please anybody. And this is not, as much as the technique can't be taught, emotion cannot, and truth cannot. And so I think a good teacher, what Jack does, what Mario does, and Mario even says it in the movie, that, I can't make you a great artist. I can't, turn you. And it's like, but I can help you. I can help you to play like yourself. And it's the same with acting or writing or anything else.
Well, and you mentioned the validation, and that's why I think I want to lead into a question I wanted to ask you about the industry at the moment. Not necessarily theoretical. Of course, we can get into that. I think me, along with probably millions of other people, and definitely people who are in the industry, because it's all shut down now. Yeah? And that's very interesting, because even in the economic depression or World War II, I think my dad, who was young during World War II, used to tell me, that was one of the great salvations, having, go be able to watch a movie. In the Depression, even, people would come up with a nickel or 3 cents to go see a movie. So it's very interesting that the people aren't working in that field at the moment, like a lot of us aren't working, but also people aren't going out for that ritual of going into the dark space with strangers for hopefully a transformative, I mean, in some sense, maybe escapist, but in another sense, could be a transformative moment in understanding yourself or your circumstances, finding encouragement with the character's triumph. And that's gone. And it's really, it's a really big difference now. So I'm just curious, anywhere you want to go with that, about, not being able to work. I know, having lived in LA, there's so many editors and sound guys and camera operators. It's not just the actors, right? Of course, it's such a big industry that's not working right now.
Yeah, I mean, like, most of my friends are actors for some reason. I don't know how that happened. Like, most of the people I hang around with are actors. Look, there's things they can do. There's all these Zoom classes, improvs, plays. I even did a Zoom play.
Interesting.
When this thing started. You can, look, as an actor, you can sit in your living room and do a sense memory every morning and record it and just get better. So there's a way to practice your craft. It might not be ideal. It might not be with a partner, in live in person. So I thought about it. I have a lot of sympathy for directors, for editors, for cinematographers, people who really have nothing to work on. For myself as a writer, that's kind of like what I've been doing. I wanted to shoot something in March. That's not happening. Personally, I feel like the whole year is fucking shot.
Yeah.
Probably for that, even if they open things, which would be stupid. Not everyone's going to feel comfortable coming back, and you're going to be real limited in the content you can shoot. If you have a sex scene or a makeout scene, you're screwed. That's not happening.
A crowd scene.
Forget it.
Yeah.
Forget it.
Do
And
you,
I don't want to see the sign of the times reflected in the narratives in years to come, because that's never good. And you look back and like, oh yeah, COVID. That's why they shot it this way. No,
right,
I mean,
right.
if it's going to interrupt the dream, don't do it. Oh, so you can wait, but at the same time, there's a lot of opportunities to write, work on things that you didn't have time for and previously. So you can spin it into a positive, I think. Great.
Well, and it's also up against this rising technological force of being able to see. I've Years ago I watched a movie completely shot on an iPhone, and it's driving me crazy that I can't find it. What it was? This was a long. It's probably maybe second year of iPhone. It was a long time ago. So you
Tangerine. Wasn't Tangerine?
Was it black and white in Paris? Maybe it wasn't the first one.
Yeah, it's Tangerine, I think.
Maybe, maybe.
Yeah.
But it was only a few actors, and it was a kind of a love story. And the guy went to
Yeah.
south of France, and then he ended up going back to his wife. But so you have this technological force which is putting storytelling, movie making into a possibilities that never existed before, and you have really emerging cinema markets. I mean, being in Turkey, because of technology, it's less of a gap between let's say a huge economic powerhouse like the U.S. making films and a country like Turkey, which is more of an emerging market. They're doing amazing work because they can close that gap in terms of not having the same equipment requirements or same technical requirements as before. I don't know if you saw Winter Sleep, but it was the first Turkish film to win the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and it's like 4 hours long. You definitely got to check it
Oh,
out.
really?
Winter Sleep, yeah.
Oh, I'm in.
Oh yeah, it's 4 hours long, and it's only a few characters in this pretty remote part of Turkey. Incredible, incredible filmmaking.
That sounds great.
And so there's opportunities just everywhere. I mean, obviously Chinese cinema has been amazing for years, but it's interesting that we have that tension right now. We're kind of shutting down, but an opening up. It's going to be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I look forward to getting back to work, but I think the best work being done right now is hopefully in the writing, because in these new circumstances, imagine everyone's got I don't know, like a new perspective on things.
Yeah,
We're all in this new situation we've never been in before, so
yeah,
I'm curious to see how that affects the writing in like 3-4 months from now.
yeah. And I think a new need that people have for those perspectives. So I think
Hmm.
it's going both ways. I think there's a hunger
That's
now
right.
for to be told stories, not just to be able the confidence to share stories that have been marginalized, erased, but also I think there's a hunger to expand coming from maybe the isolation of COVID, but also
Yeah.
from the social protests
Right.
in the U.S. I think there can be and there should be, but I think there is a lot of hunger for these new people seeking out new perspectives, maybe in ways they hadn't before.
That's right. No, I
But
agree.
I have a question for you. So you talked about it all starts with the writing. So my question is, why write words?
Yeah,
I mean, they cause a lot of trouble. It's hard.
I don't know, man.
It's hard to write them
Uh,
well.
I I mean, I fucking hate doing it.
So do I.
I'm not gonna lie. I
Yeah,
hate it. It's
yeah,
hard to get me to write.
yeah.
I'll do anything not to write. I mean, I'll find something. I'll find a distraction, no problem. I think that's normal. I think that's totally normal, because it's not that I hate the act of it. The thing that I resist, it's like I know I'm going down a hole. I know I'm leaving this realm in a way, So putting yourself there uh, as a matter of like necessity, like I got to do this. It's work. It's work sitting down to write. Once I start doing it, I'm fine.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it's not a craft that even if you know you're getting better or you're really in touch with your idea, it doesn't necessarily get easier. Each time
Right.
is a different dragon.
Exactly. Exactly. It kind of gets harder.
Yeah, sometimes it can get harder if you have blinders or ego or any other of the things, distractions that get in your way.
Yeah.
It's an incredible journey every time, but that doesn't tell how hard it can be. You
Right.
know, it tends to
But it's all right.
emphasize that.
Again, it depends where you're coming from. If you're writing towards some sort of validation, that can definitely make it harder. Um, but if first and foremost you're writing as a form of expression, that turns into a good story, it turns into a good narrative, I think that's, I don't know, for me, that's always been more pleasurable. And you end up caring less about the outcome. Even if you find success with it, it's like, cool.
So I asked you about how I guess acting made you a better director. Now I'm going to take it a different direction because you started as a writer, and you probably wrote the screenplay to Restraint before maybe you hadn't even imagined directing it, or maybe you didn't know if it would happen as a director, and so you were creating the script. So what is, looking back, going the other way, what is being a director, especially on a film like Maestro? Although Restraint, I love that movie. What has that taught you about writing,
What, acting?
directing? How do you think you've improved, maybe as a screenwriter, which is a very hard craft, very
Yeah, I
difficult?
mean, it's weird for me. I never had a big separation between screenwriting and directing. I was always imagining that I would direct whatever I was writing, and in doing so, I was vague in places. There might have been areas that were a little bit ambiguous that would flesh themselves out when I filmed it, things like that. So you take certain things for granted, maybe. But I found that I don't see a big separation, to be honest. But acting has taught me a great deal about writing.
Interesting.
In that, I mean, as directing as well, obviously.
Sure.
But it has helped me in just stripping down a scene to its bare essence, and from the get go, and be like, okay, what is and when you do it in class, you go like, because, and then when you get to the final because, you have the subtext for the actor. And I find that's true in scenes. Like there's a I don't remember who came up with it, but there's a saying, the nakedness is never in the line, which I like. Which is, they never say it, it's all like the powerful shit is what's underneath. And I definitely started to apply that in Restraint, and that, there was a certain ambiguity that I wanted to maintain, but at the same time, not to trick anybody, not to make it confusing. I just didn't want her to talk about what was bothering her, like what problems she was having. I wanted to be underneath, so that's definitely helped. That informs all of my writing now, whereas maybe before it was a little unconscious. I'm more aware that I'm doing it.
I was just thinking about my time when I was in LA and at Britain, was studying acting similar to you to help my fiction writing and screenwriting, and we were, and in this particular thing, we were working on we were putting up a play, but I had this amazing Ukrainian actor, just an incredible teacher, and he used to throw people out. It was a really larger than life personality. And I remember this in the scene study, the better you got, the more he would cut you. And I remember one particular night where a person would come in, and before he spoke his first line, he'd be like, cut, and then ask a bunch of questions, and then and then he would go, okay, start again. And then he'd go in, and he was going to order a beer, like this was the beginning of the scene. And then he goes in and he, excuse me, he goes up and he orders it, and he goes, cut. And we have this long discussion about what beer did he drink? Did he work for it? Did he find the money on the street? All this context. And I mean, he was the best teacher I think I've ever had. And then he would
Who is this?
He was Ivan Markota. Unfortunately, he's passed away. But he knew those early guys like Bobby Lewis, who came back after meeting with Stella Adler, and he had I think he was one generation removed from Bobby Lewis, and he was a
Yeah.
similar teacher. But and then he would stop and just go on an incredible analysis of Tennessee Williams. Like there's a croquet scene in Tennessee Williams, and he would be talking about all these references about it, and it was this. I think acting gives you this incredible gift of paying attention, not only to
Yeah.
yourself and what you're feeling, but this gets back to the moments we were talking about in terms of a creative life as a creative act. And I think studying acting, or I could dance or body movement, I guess would be the same, but to really pay attention.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's half of it, and that's the other thing I can see so readily now when I'm watching a scene on TV is if the scene partner's not there. If your scene partner is just waiting to talk, you can see them not listening, if you're paying attention, really. It's the worst thing for acting. I mean, I think like 60% of it is listening.
Yeah, yeah. I think you had talked about. I want to go back because Cut was your first. I guess you would say not your first short story because I had heard some of those, but when you were reading in St. Petersburg. But uh, you had mentioned something when I talked to you earlier that something may be going on with Cut. It may be being released again because it's a great book,
Yeah.
but it I don't think it got. I think it does. It didn't
No,
get
it
the
had a shit.
attention that it deserved.
I can talk about this now. I couldn't talk about it before. So basically, I published with a small publisher. It was my first novel, and did a lot of made a lot of videos for it under the company banner and stuff like that. And let's just say it wasn't handled well. Um, and then he overpriced the book so much that I couldn't, in good conscience, promote it. I couldn't ask my friends to buy a $23 paperback. Just couldn't do it. That they just didn't pay. They didn't pay, and it was true with like all of the authors under that ban. He just didn't pay them. So everyone got reversion agreements, and everyone got the rights to their book back. So yeah, I'm just gonna put it up. I think I'm having a cover designed right now. The book is done. I'm not gonna re-edit it.
I
the
think that's
videos are
smart.
still modern and look good. So I'll just probably go indie on this one on the re-release and have
That's
it out
great.
there.
Well, I'd love to have you back on to talk about that and dive a little bit more into our literary history and your approach to fiction. There was another line that jumped out at me in my rewatch of Maestro, and I don't know if it's a line, but it's an exchange. So the maestro is talking to the student, and he says, "What's your fear?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know this part.
My
And
favorite scene.
oh, great, great! I'm glad I bring it up. And says, and the student, who's not, by the way, a young person. I mean, he's younger, but I mean, he's already a pretty accomplished musician. So he's not
He's
some,
lived.
he's not
He's lived. Yeah.
he's not a 15-year-old pianist, right? He's a
No,
professional.
he had a hit song.
Right, number one song, right? If I remember correct.
Yeah. 1937.
Yeah, and he says, "I just need to know if I have it in me." And the maestro's answer is, "Keep working, find out, keep your eyes open, keep playing." And I thought that's great advice for America at this moment. I think we fear failing, and we are failing.
Full credit to Xander Berkeley, who improvised those lines on set.
Wow.
And that scene was largely improvised. It was I knew that I wanted that to be like, that was kind of the arc that would typically come toward the end of the film, like where he really he breaks through. He finally understands what it is to compose from inside rather than working from his brain or academically. To me, it's my favorite moment in the movie because it has a very strong message to the audience, to potential artists. It's the moment where that character really blooms, but also it's one of the deepest moments in the relationship between those two, and an example of how a great teacher what a great teacher is. That he's not trying to teach you the way he would do it. He's not trying to show you what works, or the way he's seen it done that works. It's you, and he's just guiding.
Yeah.
And that's like a perfect example of guiding as instruction.
And what strikes so powerful, along with what you said about him learning to kind of compose from within in a way he hadn't done before, but it's also he's been doing that most of his life, it seems, at least in the film, about
Mm-hmm.
showing himself with his I guess fiance, or with his the love of his life, who I think it's the first time he's so it connects that vulnerability of it's the first time he takes a chance, and I think is vulnerable
Yeah, I agree.
with somebody, and that precipitates the breakthrough. And I was thinking about that's why it's a good lesson. I mean, for all of us individually, but I was thinking about America as do we feel failure? I mean, we have failed, but do we feel fear failure? And we have to just keep working to find out and keep our eyes open. And during this time of social chaos or economic um, uncertainty, a lot of people suffering, people are still, I think hurt, or at least mentally unhinged from the lockdowns and the changes to their life. Keeping our eyes open, and this notion of playing, of not necessarily doing everything right, but just playing, just trying to experience new things, trying to be open.
Mm-hmm.
That's that I think it just struck me as very prescriptive. I think everyone's looking for textual things. A lot of people are sharing quotes, and Baldwin's being sent around, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of address a lot of what's going on in America through text, and that really I thought struck with me, and when I was watching it this time around.
Thanks, man. No, I'm glad it did. I mean, you don't intend for these messages
Right.
to become what they are, and it's funny how they're shaped by world circumstances. Um, but I think it's a timeless thing. What he's talking about,
Yeah.
and all I hope is, I mean, my big hope is that people walk away from that film knowing who he was, because I don't think anyone really did outside of musical circles.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I hope they see what an impact he had, on so many people. I mean, he's largely responsible for film music in general as we know it.
Yeah. I, th- I think the one of the interest. There's your new cat, huh?
That's Dudley, yeah.
Well,
He's my favorite.
congratulations on Dudley.
Oh,
He
thanks,
helped
man.
you get you through the quarantine, through the lockdown.
We got him like back in March.
Yeah,
So
right at the beginning of it. Yeah, or was it
yeah,
not yet?
she wasn't not having a cat, so
You
went out
can.
to Desert Hot Springs and adopted him.
You're probably learning a lot about acting from watching a kitten.
I guess, man. He's a he's a really perceptive cat. He extremely smart. He gets into movies. So if we're watching a movie, he'll be like, if there's an emotional moment or there's like a conflict, he'll really pay attention. He'll go up to the screen and be like, "Yo, you good?" Like he has a lot of empathy.
A lot of
He's
empathy.
a,
That
he's a lot of empathy. He's a good guy.
that's something we need. That's
Yes.
something we need a lot of right now. No more entrenchment. We need empathy. We need
Yeah,
crossing
I agree.
trenches.
Dudley is our
Filling
example.
trenches. Yeah. I was um I was wondering if you had any thoughts as a director. I know, or in the community, about if this will change. I talked about the cinema experience, and I'm wondering about the cinema business. I did mention AMC may try to open, but do you think I don't want to be pessimistic and it's gone, but do you think it'll shift that? Like more people will make films aiming for Amazon, or there'll be some
I think
hybrid releases, or do you think that world is gonna? I'm mentioning it because for my dad's other generation, my grandparents' generation, of movies really saved them in difficult times. That gathering together,
hmm
and
I mean, it's
now
different
we
now. I
seem to
think
be we're in houses looking at screens, and I wonder if
we were anyway.
there's thoughts. That's what I mean. But this may have this was already moving toward that, but coronavirus maybe have dealt a
I mean,
pretty
it's certainly
intense blow.
it's definitely further commodified binge watching and
Yeah.
encouraged it, obviously. But I think we're headed that direction anyway. I mean, no, I don't think movie theaters in the long term are going to suffer. I think they're suffering now, um, and I think opening now is dumb and like really irresponsible because and furthermore, I just don't have any incentive to do it. I mean, I was trying to imagine what going to the Arc like would be like tomorrow if there was anything I even wanted to see. Like, okay, so I get to wear a mask for 4 hours
Mm-hmm.
and go through 7 different levels of obstacle courses where some film student who just finished his shift at Chipotle is going to make medical choices for me and ensure my safety. Also, I can sit and watch Transformers 80 for 2 fucking hours. I don't need it. I don't need it. So if you really want to get me to risk my life under those circumstances, you better make a good movie.
Yeah, and I think there's something archetypal in that experience. I mean, we're going all the way back to going into the cave to hear the stories by the fire. But I don't think I think
It
it's going
won't
to be
ever
a
end.
while. It'll never go away. But I think it'll be. I think people will be pretty hesitant for a little while.
Oh, this year, yeah, but I think in like long term, no. I think the future of theater going is very positive. I think that what's going to happen out of necessity is 2 things. Just my opinion. I think number one, ticket prices will have to go down somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't reconcile paying $13.99 a month for unlimited Netflix
Mm-hmm.
versus $18 for a ticket for a movie that you don't even know if you like yet. And the other thing is curation. I just think they're going to find fascinating ways to curate that will incentivize people to go.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect about Netflix and Amazon is how they're just going. They're really encouraging people to go in new directions in writing and filmmaking. I mean, sometimes they're just writing blank checks here and there. Yeah, it sounds good to us. Go for it. Try it. And they wouldn't do that for a theatrical release.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They're making some really interesting things.
Yeah, and they're buying a Japanese film, a series or a Turkish series, and putting that up around the world. It's a very
Yeah, dude.
very is it it's a very good time for filmmaking, don't you think?
I
Not
think
not
so.
today, but this time.
This time, yeah. I mean, I would say like especially with the access to gear like cameras, you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to process film anymore. There's ways to shoot very cheaply. I'm surprised independent filmmakers aren't more active in that realm. Like, yeah, I always go back to John Cassavetes and I watch his movies.
Yeah.
Sure, exactly the way I want to be making movies, exactly. And I'm just like, this guy was doing this shit in the late '60s. He had to process film. He had to shoot on 35, which is I'd love to shoot more on 35, um, but it's an expense. It can be a deterrent at times. And now it's like you are shit out of excuses, man. There's no reason that there's no reason as a filmmaker you should be sitting around waiting for a deal. There's no reason that you shouldn't write it to do it and just go do it, unless you've got gazillions and you can do whatever you want. Writing toward your resources, but in a way that serves the narrative and fits with the characters in the narrative is a very, very rewarding experience, and it's really hard. And at the same time, it makes you a better filmmaker, I think, because
So
there's a producing aspect.
is that your process when you wrote Restraint? We got to talk a little bit about Restraint
Yeah,
because so as you're writing and you're envisioning directing this, you're writing toward your resources, but not at the expense of narrative. But in
right.
fact, probably with that movie in particular, it probably opened up new ways of thinking about the narrative. So those restrictions, according to like the ancient Greek model, the restrictions didn't result in limitations, but actually probably gave you creative solutions and insights. So you can
Absolutely. It gave
embrace your lack of resources because it may
absolutely, and you
steer
go
to new
forward.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, and really just focus on the characterization. more than production value or anything else. But with Restraint, it was the first time I did that. It was the first time, as you know, that I wrote, knowing I was going to go out and do it regardless. I wasn't going to ask permission. I wasn't going to wait for the money. I was just going to go do it. And that was a very revealing thing for me as a director. Like that's the way. I wish I had started to do that 15 years earlier, when I was just writing and assuming that, the 1990s model of indie filmmaking still applied, where you could just write your way in, and then you'd ultimately be moved up to director. I'm like, I was late to the party, man. I was just like, fuck that, just go do it. And that's my philosophy now. And I just wrote a feature version of my short film 5 Families to do in the exact same way. And I would say the only real difference is it took me a little longer, to be honest. It took me a little longer because, when I have access to pretty much all the locations in the script and the people and the props and everything else, but that didn't happen overnight, and making that fit and making it work organically is a big job.
And that's one big difference when you talked about how hard writing was when you think about a novel, you may have these thoughts of, oh, if I never get published, I don't know if I'll ever get published. That's one of your main barriers to finishing. You can't think like that. But there's a lot of barriers to screenwriting, in the sense of you could write this great thing, but how's the money? Maybe a lot more excuses, as you said, to give in. And you just have to, I loved how you said there's no excuses. There's no excuses now with the technology. And the way that you embrace the limitation to give yourself to produce. Restraint would have been a different screenplay if you didn't have these limitations.
Well, they tried, and even if I had gone a traditional route, it would have been different. Like when we started to put it together, my producer Amelia, who was the first one to sign on, she tried to encourage. She's like, I have a guy. He's a producer. He's financed a bunch of this. Just let's hear him out. And I'm like, fine. And we went for the meetings with him, and it was just like, I know that I see where this is going. I see exactly where this is going. And, it's really good. I like this. What if we did this? What if she were a drug addict? What if they were this? What if and I'm like, cool. That sounds like a really good movie. That's not this one. And you should do that. And I'll work with you on that.
Did you ever see Mistress?
Oh, Barry's movie. Yeah. My Barry Primus made it. He's the one starring in 5 Families.
Really?
Yeah.
It's the movie with De Niro. They meet him. He's the super producer, and he's like, the artist becomes a photographer, and every time he makes a new deal, he's got to write a new leading lady. And Christopher Walken has one of the most amazing 10-second
jumps off the building.
And he takes the whole movie. I didn't know he directed it. It's an amazing movie. Yeah, but it illustrates that principle perfectly. About it. He gets further and further from the idea.
That's right. That's funny, man, that you brought that up.
Yeah, it's not too many people seen it. I love that movie.
I do too. I hope he gets to direct again. I know he's got a couple projects, but I met Barry in Jack's workshop. Barry had worked with Jack for 50 years. Yeah. He was in the group theater. He was in the Lincoln Center. Worked with Kazan multiple times, and this legendary actor. And then, but he never stopped studying. Like he's been studying acting with Jack for 40 or 45 years, and still comes to the workshops and does scenes with us, and is always learning.
Yeah, amazing. So you mentioned 5 Families. Is it being affected by either the isolation of COVID or where everyone seems to be re-examining, even before the Black Lives Matter protests following the George Floyd murder, which only brings more reflection, more re-examination, more outrage. Even before that, people were thinking about, I'm going to use this lockdown to learn Chinese, and other people were saying, I just want to watch the sunset for the first time. And everyone seemed to be re-examining their life. Has that affected your process, and you were in the middle of working on the screenplay for your next project?
It's interesting, man. It's a great question. So I was, before this shit went down, I was working on the script pretty heavily. I was aiming to shoot in March, and it would have been done by now. And I realized that this was a blessing, that I really needed to do more work on the script and take the time to just, really flesh it out and go where I needed to go with it. Funny enough, I mean, you know me, you know how I've always felt about, you know, police brutality and specifically black shootings by police. It's been making my blood boil for a very long time. And it's in the movie. I mean, there's a whole strain of that was in the original draft that I started a year and a half, 2 years ago, with one of the characters who's just very shocked by that and decides to take his own action. But it's all sort of fitting within the main narrative, which is, an older semi-retired former member of the Jewish mafia out here who has completely gone legit, is no longer active, being pursued by these cops who are behaving like gangsters, and sort of like blurs the theme of like, wait, what does law and order look like in a society where the good guys and the bad guys are all scrambled?
So it's amplified almost. It's giving you more as you think about the direction of the screenplay.
Well, I could see it when I make this movie, people saying that thread must have come out of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and this movement that we're seeing right now. But in reality, this is not a new problem. We all know that. It's been going on for decades, if not more. But it really came out of just my own anger at what was happening, and that nothing was being done about it, and that it was almost like we're desensitized to it. And my character was like, sees his first police shooting video. He's a young guy. He's just completely galvanized, and feels a need to act right away.
Yeah. Well, we're at an hour, my friend.
All right, man.
Is there anything
we should
else?
Do it again.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I think we covered
the process?
It,
yeah.
Yeah.
I did want to give you another recommendation. I don't know. The translation is Bliss. It's a Turkish film. I mean, it's probably not powerful in terms of winter sleep, but I want to advertise a little bit about Turkish cinema right now. Hope you'll check it out. It's called Bliss, based on a famous novel in Turkey. And I'll just give you the first setup, because as a director, I've noticed you love those first 10 seconds or 30 seconds of film. So it opens up with, it's in a village town I believe the middle of Turkey in the mountains. And it's a village. I don't even know if there's electricity, and which is common. It's not a period piece. It's now, right? Some parts of Turkey are not as developed. And it opens up with a teenage girl being pushed into a barn. She's maybe about 16, 18. And then an older woman who you find out is her mother, she throws her a rope and then locks the door. And she's not supposed to leave that barn. She's supposed to take that rope and do the right thing because she has dishonored her family.
Oh,
that's the opening. But she doesn't.
What's it called?
She doesn't do it, Adam. She won't do it. So that brings more disgrace. So then, I'm not giving it away, believe me. Then, because it's only a few minutes into the film, so then her cousin, I think it's like a second cousin, is supposed to take her to Istanbul to kill her. That's the beginning of the movie.
Oh.
So now he's got to. It's pretty. You can tell it's from a book. I can't read. I haven't read it in Turkish.
What's the name of it again?
It's called Bliss in English.
Bliss.
Bliss. Bliss, and the other one is Winter Sleep.
Winter Sleep. I'm gonna watch both.
Yeah,
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, you got anything for me?
Let's do it again, brother.
You got anything for me? Anything I need to watch during this? We're able to go outside, but I'm not really leaving Izmir at the moment.
Weird, man. I'm in a place where I've been forgetting a lot of what I watch.
I'm so glad you said that, because I've been forgetting everything. I think it's the lockdown.
I think my favorite thing in lockdown has been the Netflix series The Eddy.
I don't know.
About the jazz musicians in Paris.
Oh, interesting. What's it called?
It's called The Eddy, Eddy.
Wow.
It stars Andre Holland, who was the actor at the end of Moonlight, who played his friend grown up, who was the chef, and he's the lead. And this guy's phenomenal, phenomenal actor. But if you like jazz and you like Paris and you like movies, then this is definitely for you.
That's great. Did you watch Trotsky on Netflix?
No.
That's an amazing series. That's an amazing series. And what's interesting about Russian cinema and television right now is that they can criticize everybody. You know, because obviously under the Soviets you couldn't criticize them, and so you had to either avoid things, or if you talked about the pre-revolution, it had to be in a certain lens, right?
Yeah.
Even if you were telling a story, like even Dostoevsky made into a movie during Soviet times, stuff had to be left out if it didn't fit with Soviet ideology. But then also during the Romanovs, they didn't have the film equipment. But now you have these young, these filmmakers, not young, but a lot of people who made a lot of films. Now they're turning back in the stories, and everything is open. That's what's really interesting about Trotsky, because it's looking at everything in a different way, and it was a really well done miniseries. Really good acting. Check it out. Yeah,
I will. The Russian independent film scene is starting to really blow up.
Exactly.
Because they've got sources that they're not being financed solely by the Russian government.
Yeah, it's international.
Independent channels.
Yeah, it's international, and I think there may have been an international aspect to the production of Trotsky, but that it has this incredible scene where Trotsky he has his old name before he takes his new name. He ends up taking a name. I won't tell you too much, but there's a prison warden who wants Trotsky is kind of leading an uprising in the prison, so he brings him in to play chess. This prison warden, and they're playing chess, and Trotsky starts raging at him about his class is going to be the time for their class is over. They're going to be they're going to be thrown into the dustbin of history. Their whole world's going to be shattered. It's coming. And this is a great performance by the prison warden. And he says, he says a line where you would either scratch the eyes or claw out the eyes of Mona Lisa. And this only sets Trotsky off more. And Trotsky says, oh, take your bourgeois speak away and your highfalutin artistic talk, and the time is coming for you. And then he looks at Trotsky and he says, those aren't my words. Those are Dostoevsky's words. Is he going to go in your dustbin of history too?
You're right.
Which is what happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's incredible to see some of these. And China, Zhang Yimou is one of the longtime favorite director of mine. And if you haven't you've seen Flowers of War?
Yes. You recommended it.
That was an incredible movie. Yeah.
Yeah. I watched it right after you told me.
Yeah. Big influence on younger American filmmakers. So, well, we could go on forever, but I hope you'll join us again.
Anytime.
And talk about this. And good luck with the re-release of Cut and with the Five Families project. I hope you'll join us again to talk about creativity. And thank you for spending so much time with me. And now I've learned once again, there's no excuses. So those books I've been promising you should be finished. There's no excuses.
No excuses.
And I don't even have a movie on my mind. But thank you, and say hi to Sasha, who we've seen go back and forth, and Dudley.
You got it, brother. Thanks for having me.
And if you are new to the channel, please subscribe and share the content. We'll list some of the books and movies we've talked about in the description below. And we will see you next time.